Video games. Can they actually teach kids lessons? Curious to know what your opinion is on this because video games have been a very big part of my life, and I think to some degree they can teach a lot of valuable lessons. So, why don't we talk about this? Because video games are often sometimes frowned upon for when it comes to learning or education because a lot of the games that you may hear that are very popular are not necessarily meant for learning and education. But that doesn't mean that all video games are the same, because they're not. There's so many varieties of video games out there that you can benefit from a variety of other games besides just the most popular ones that you often hear about these days. So if we take a look back at the history of video games, games back in the day often taught much more valuable lessons. I'm not saying like they're going to teach the lesson, like educational lessons of learning various skills and abilities, but they do teach something to especially kids that are playing that may start to get them curious about other things. So let's look at some examples of this. So some of these lessons that kids can learn from video games, especially primarily back in the day, we're talking about older games or games that are not necessarily popular now these days. They can teach the lesson of curiosity and discovery, trial and error, and even problem-solving skills. And the reason for this is a lot of these older games, you may not have had a guide in order to get through the game. And you had to do a lot of trial and error. Like how many times you had to check all of the walls in this room to see if you could go through them, or how to defeat a certain enemy in the game. Or maybe it's some sort of puzzle strategy game where you have to move your characters a certain way, do a certain amount of damage, do certain skills. Thumbs up. That's right. Exactly. Thumbs up. Indeed. So there's a variety of different things that kids can learn from these games back in the day that perhaps they don't necessarily learn now. Puzzle games, strategy games, even RPG games were the ones that required the most brain power because you had to really think about your actions. You had to think before you took that turn. Think before you made the wrong decision. Or, something bad is going to happen if you don't think things through, if you just try to rush through it and don't really care. It requires some more brain power than just, other mindless games these days. Because if we take a look at games that have come out after a lot of those initial games, a lot of the early games that can be considered retro games, even archaic games at this time, even like PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3 games, those can be considered like retro games because they're such old systems now. But the games these days, well, the interesting thing, okay, so let's actually talk about between the games these days and way back in the day. So the games way back in the day, we're talking like NES games, Sega Genesis games, which was one of my favorite systems back in the day, Game Boy, Nintendo 64. For the most part, a lot of those really old games, there wasn't like an in-depth story in the game. It wasn't like you were going to boot up the game, you were going to get like 10-15 minute cutscenes about something that was going to happen in the game that makes you really think about, certain situations. That didn't really come until, I guess, some games maybe on the Nintendo 64, sure. And there were some cutscenes in various other games, but usually very minor. PlayStation 1, you would have some more cutscenes and such. PlayStation 2, absolutely a lot more. GameCube, PSP, PS3, all that sort of stuff further on. So the actual storyline of the game can also be very important as well, because there are certain games that have a very in-depth, thought-provoking story that is almost like a movie where you're watching it, you're trying to figure out what's going on here, and then you're actually taking the actions in the game to solve the problem that you saw in the cutscene. So that can also be a form of getting your curiosity peak. What's going to happen now? You're thinking about things. But now let's jump ahead to current games. Sure, there's probably plenty of cutscenes in these games, absolutely, depending on the type of game that it is. But let's talk about more available access that kids and people play these days, and that especially when it comes to mobile gaming, games on the phone. These are supposed to be very quick and easy type games that you just pick up and you just play. There's no story, there's no strategy involved. It's kind of brain rot material, essentially. It really is. It would rot your mind away because it's such a mindless games that have absolutely no purpose whatsoever and are just here just to waste your time. There's usually often no strategy involved. You're not really thinking much of anything, and it's just absolutely horrible. And if you've ever looked at even any of the advertisements for mobile games, they are absolutely horrendous. Honestly, it is quite appalling to actually see. I can't believe that it's even allowed, some of the ads for mobile games. So a lot of them, very, very simple, very simplistic. It's basically just like an AI just whipped it together real quick, and doesn't really do much of anything. So that tends to be the problem these days, that a lot of people, especially a lot of kids, are perhaps playing, and it's not really teaching them anything. It's not like it was back in the day where you had just a few games and you kept trying again and again and again and again to actually beat them or to make progress in them, and you're struggling, so you have to try to figure out a new way. No, you just give up on the game, you just go to a new one. That tends to be the problem with video games these days, and why I personally prefer games from back in the day, which is why I started my own gaming channel many, many years ago, Asphodel Gaming, if you would like to come check it out. I play mostly older games because I enjoy older games more. It really is, and it's nostalgic. It's nostalgic for me and for my viewers as well, because it's something so much better about the older games, even if you know exactly what to do, than it is like some of the newer games. But I am really curious to hear about your personal belief on this. Do you think that video games do teach kids lessons, very valuable, positive lessons, or do you think it's all bad? Or do you kind of agree with me, or do you not agree with me when it comes to my thoughts about older games providing more puzzle and strategy and thought-provoking element to them, as opposed to games these days? I'm really curious to hear what your thoughts are on this, because if you're around my age, in your 30s or older, then you know some of the older games. But if you're younger, like 20s or even, teens or whatever, then perhaps you don't necessarily know the older games all that well. But I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are. So y'all take care. Have a great one. Have a great one. Bye-bye.